Alright, so let's see. We're on the play here. And reasonable hand. Got a couple Glintnest Cranes here to kick things off. And there's a Hissing Quagmire, so we'll see if that means Black-Green Delirium or not. Alright, looks like we have plenty of flagships here. So we're looking for more lands in order to really effectively curve out. And it looks like it's not Black-Green Delirium. It could be Black-Green Aetherworks Marvel, perhaps. So, yeah. Our opponent is racking up energy rather quickly. And our hand's not great, actually. We've found multiples of all of our cards. Every single spell we've played, we have had two of, which is very unusual. 2 Panharmonicon, 2 flagships, 2 reflectors, 2 Glintnest Cranes. Here's an Oath of Liliana. Wow, wasn't expecting that one. So I'm gonna take this opportunity to get one of the Panharmonicons into play. Our opponent hasn't played any creatures yet, though, so we actually would like our opponent to play some sort of random creatures so we could bounce it or kill it. But Oath of Liliana indicates that our opponent may have some Planeswalkers, and the flagship can target Planeswalkers, so that's a good thing. And yep, speak of the devil, there's a Planeswalker. And it happens to be Nissa, so unfortunately we didn't draw a land, which would have been the best draw there. So, a couple options. We could Reflector Mage away the tokens. I think we want to go after Nissa, though, and play a second copy of Panharmonicon. And so now we're really when we get these Reflector Mages and Skyships into play, they're really going to do a number on our opponent. So here's a Tireless Tracker. We don't really mind that. It does mean our opponent's going to get to draw some cards, but it's not the end of the world. It looks like we're playing against a control deck of some sort. There's a Prophetic Prism. Okay. And there's a land, so that's good. And this flagship is going to be pretty impressive. So we can just go after 3 different permanents of our opponents and just kind of devastate our opponent's board here. So Nissa goes to 1, and then what we can do is we can attack it with Glintnest Crane to completely get rid of Nissa, get rid of Tireless Tracker, and get rid of the zombie all in one go. And we also still have the 6/5 flying vehicle that can shoot things down. We've got another one in our hand. So things are looking good for us. These plant tokens we can deal with very, very easily. And it looks like our opponent's going to attempt to continue on with their game plan of Planeswalkers. So I like playing Eldrazi Displacer here because it can crew the Skyship. So I'm going to do that. And we're just going to... We don't need to go after our opponent's life total just yet, so we're just going to get rid of, basically undo the damage that the Nissa did. Get rid of the Nissa itself, get rid of the zombie. And the funny thing is, this isn't even one of the good draws of this deck. We haven't drawn any Cloud Blazers or anything to really gas back up, but it's working out so far. Alright, it looks like our opponent has even more Planeswalkers where those Nissas came from. So we're gonna have to grind through what our opponent's doing here. But it shouldn't be that difficult. We can play Reflector Mage here and just kind of bounce away all of these creatures that our opponent has. And I am going to play the other Reflector Mage in hand because that's going to mean we're going to have enough power to crew the ship we already have in play. And now we can actually go after our opponent's life total and then shoot the Omnixilis with the trigger from the flagship. And in case our opponent deals with this Sky Sovereign, we still have our backup one ready to go. Interesting that our opponent's playing Attune. We haven't really seen much for energy besides Aether Hub. But maybe our opponent does have some sort of energy payoff card. Alright, so that Grasp is pretty annoying. What we can do, though, is use Westvale Abbey to make a creature, but now that we've drawn Pilgrim's Eye, we can just play that instead. And this Pilgrim's Eye is going to get us a lot of lands. 3 lands. And that's pretty relevant because we didn't have our land drop for the turn. And looks like we may be able to kill our opponent next turn, although that Shambling Vent means our opponent could potentially gain some life here. But this is a matchup similar to just regular old Black-Green Delirium, where it's just so hard to beat the Panharmonicon deck in the late game, which is where we're at right now. Even all these Planeswalkers aren't that impressive. So our opponent got rid of a Reflector Mage there. So we're a little bit flooded at this point. So we can't actually crew the ship here, so I'm going to just play out the other one. And we're going to get a bunch of triggers here. And Our opponent's Sorin is not long for this world, that's for sure. And so even though this game has been back and forth, we have a lot of great draws left in our deck. With 3 Panharmonicons in play and a Skyship, feels like the inevitability is on our side. But it looks like our opponent has pretty much every single Planeswalker you could think of. Liliana's good here. That's for sure. It's able to get rid of our Pilgrim's Eye. And here's a Shambling Vent activation. So we do really want to draw something to gas us back up. And that's a good way of doing it. Cloud Blazer. So let's see what we can draw off of 8 cards here that we're getting. And now you can see how this deck kind of snowballs. So just an insane amount of gas there. We're able to get a bunch of clues now off of some Thraben Inspectors. We can... And, yeah, our opponent's just going to concede with those 8 clues. And, yep, okay. So it looked like our opponent had a chance there, but that one Cloud Blazer, and the game was over. So for this matchup, I think we want the Thought-Knot Seer and some of the counter spells. We've seen a lot of Planeswalkers. Not too many actual creatures besides those tokens that were coming into play from the Oath of Liliana. So I think we can cut the Stasis Snares from our deck for this matchup. And let's see. Probably shave a Reflector Mage. And sure, cut a Displacer. A lot of these cards are good. Like, not like we actively want to be cutting Displacers and Reflector Mages, but it seems worth it to make room for the Spell Shrivels, although it maybe since we're on the draw, we don't even need Spell Shrivel for this matchup. It feels like a pretty great matchup. I guess the Pilgrim's Eye is also a consideration for cutting, because we did see the Planeswalker Liliana, but we'll keep this configuration, see how it goes. If our opponent manages to take a game off of us here, we can always reconfigure for game 3. So this is a fine hand. And yep. Just gonna set up here in the early turns. Like to get a waste in this type of situation off the Evolving Wilds, just so we have it in play. Have that colorless source in case we draw something like a Thought-Knot Seer. And can start looting through our deck a little bit with the Smuggler's Copter potentially. Our opponent could have brought in some artifact removal, or just plain old removal spell here, but that's fine. We're still just gonna run out a Crane, see if we can find anything off of it. Okay, nope. So we found a couple Drowners, but we have an Evolving Wild, so we can shuffle away those Drowners, and I think we want to do that because Drowner is one of the cards we want to draw. So I like shuffling here with Evolving Wilds. Now we'll crew up the Copter, and our opponent certainly could have a removal spell in this spot, and they do. So down goes the Smuggler's Copter. Wow, Gideon. Gideon is good. That was one Planeswalker we hadn't actually seen yet, but our opponent does have it here, and that's gonna pose a problem. So we're gonna try to pressure it as best we can here. And we could go for Thought Knot. We could also go for Glintnet Crane. I think both are reasonable plays here. I'm gonna go for Thought Knot, for Glintnet Crane rather, because we really want to get either a copter there or a skyship. We did not get either though. Even so, we do have negate available to us. So if our opponent plays a non-creature spell like another Planeswalker, which we've seen plenty of, we can negate that, untap, play Thought Knot, attack Gideon, and try to play the game from there. And I'm not going to counter this Attune. Seems like it could be bait. There's another Attune. Yeah, we're just going to let these Attunes resolve. Alright, so here I like coming at Gideon. I still kind of want to leave up this negate, though. So Gideon's going to go down to 1. And I'm going to play out the Pilgrim's Eye that we drew. And leave up negate. It's a little bit of a bold decision not to play the Thought Knot here. But I like it. We just want to keep something like Sorin from coming down. I think if our opponent had Nissa, that could also be a problem. Another Gideon could be a problem. So now we can play Thought Knot and have negate mana available. So let's do that. And if our opponent goes to try to kill Thought Knot here with something like a Grasp, I would let that resolve. But it looks like our opponent's hand is just a couple of Anguished Unmakings. So it's not that bad for us here. And we can get this Gideon off the battlefield completely. So our opponent's going for an Anguished Unmaking on the Thought Knot. We could counter this if we wanted to, which would stop our opponent from drawing a card off the Anguished Unmaking. Alright, let's counter it. Kind of taught myself into that one. But this is going to mean if our opponent peels something like a Sorin or a nice big play here, that's going to be bad for us. And it looks like something was drawn. Yep, alright, there's a Gideon. The only good thing about this is that our opponent can't really attack with these knights past the Thought Knot Seer. So the Thought Knot Seer being in play is definitely important. And we've still got the flyers. We can pressure the Gideon in essentially the same way that we did before. It could be our opponent's even thinking about making an emblem, with Gideon to buff up these knight allies. And so there we go. Our opponent is actually going to go for the emblem here, which is interesting, but it's still our opponent's not able to make attacks. And I like actually just leaving up the 5 mana for Westvale Abbey and just attacking here for 3. And so what we can do is we can actually make Ormondal at any point if we want to. And I'm very tempted to actually just go for that right away. Our opponent's got 1 unknown card, basically. And that's it. So, alright. Now our opponent's grasping after we've made a 1/1. But we can put our opponent on a really fast clock. The only issue with it is that we saw Oath of Liliana, so we could make Ormondal and then our opponent could play the Oath. That would be worst case scenario, though. So let's sack a clue first. There's Reflector Mage, which is pretty good. So we've got Panharmonicon and Reflector Mage in hand now. So we could go for Ormondal. It's pretty tempting to do that. Even if our opponent were to find an Oath, we wouldn't be out of it, and our opponent would have to basically draw one in the next 2 draw steps. Or an Anguish to Making, something like that would be bad for us. Alright, let's pull the trigger on it. Hopefully it doesn't come back to bite. But it's basically a 2-turn clock, so we hit our opponent right here. If our opponent doesn't play an Oath or an Anguish to Making or like a Sorin to gain life, that's just going to be the game. If our opponent does have the answer, we can still go Panharmonicon plus Reflector Mage and try to win the game from there.